In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia, and put in the treasure house of his God. And then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel, the name Belteshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and to Azariah, Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, "I am afraid of the Lord my king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men of your age? The king would then have my head because of you." Daniel then said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine, and they were to drink, and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus.
Thanks, Tim. There are just some outlines being handed out now, just so you can help you follow along. And just be aware that this is pretty well the exact talk that I will be giving at World Assembly. Buenas noches. Kia ora. I'm Ben, and I am a Kiwi. That's what we call ourselves in New Zealand. Out of all of the animals that we could choose to be our national animal, we chose the tiny, flightless, endangered, half-blind bird. Then we say with pride, we are Kiwis. Our country is an interesting one. You may not know where it is though, because often we're left off the world map. And apparently our accent can be quite hard to understand. So if you meet someone this week and you're not sure if they're speaking English or not, they might just have a New Zealand accent. Please be gracious with us. Our country is very multicultural. Let me tell you a bit about my family. My dad was born and raised in New Zealand, and my mum is from Scotland. I have a sister-in-law from Korea and a brother-in-law from Nigeria. Our closest family friends are from Samoa. Our family celebrations are amazing. The food is incredible. We'll have the hearty English roast beef with Yorkshire pudding and maybe the spicy Scottish haggis. Then there's the potent kimchi and tasty bulgogi from Korea. This food is delicious. 이 음식들은 맛있어요. Also add the tangy egusi soup and flavor some jollof rice from Nigeria and the Samoan delicacy of raw fish and coconut milk. Then, of course, we finish the meal with pavlova, the dessert which definitely came from New Zealand despite what the Australians might tell me.
Yeah.
Diverse cultures around meal tables is something happening all over the world today. It will be happening at World Assembly, and it will happen even here at Summit. It lets us get to know who people are and what they value. To share food is to share culture and identity. This is what we see in Daniel 1. A group of young Jewish men faced with a meal table foreign to them. Will they share in the Babylonian culture and identity? What will they choose to value? And how will they choose to live in a culture foreign to their own? Daniel 1 begins with a mighty act of God. The Lord who is faithful delivers faithless Judah. But this isn't the kind of deliverance that Judah would have wanted. This is the judgment that the prophet Jeremiah had warned would come if the people did not repent and put their trust back in the just God. But instead they choose their own way of living rather than the way intended by God. So when Nebuchadnezzar lays siege on Jerusalem, what happens? God remains faithful to his covenant. God delivers the faithless nation into exile as he promised he would. The nation of Judah is defeated. Not only this, but Nebuchadnezzar also takes away some of the items of the temple of the one true God and places them in the house of his God. Daniel chapter 5 tells us that these items were those of gold and silver, the best and most holy items, stolen as a Babylonian trophy. It would have been disgusting and offensive for Judah to see their temple defiled. And not only are these items taken, but we see them again in Daniel 5, being used in a feast worshipping Babylonian gods. The holy items of gold and silver, dedicated to the transcendent invisible God, are used to worship idols of wood and stone. Does this mean God has been defeated? Though despite a conquered nation and a desecrated temple, surely they can look to the next generation, the future leaders and the nobility. There must be a strong, handsome hero that will come and rescue them. Well, Babylon also took their heroes. They took the young, the handsome, and the intelligent. The best were taken and marched away from their home to serve the Babylonian king, knowing each step closer to Babylon is a step away from Jerusalem, a step away from their land, away from their identity. Each step seems to take them further from the promises of God. They aren't just taken, but Daniel and his friends are given new names. Daniel, whose name means God is my judge, is given a name referring to a Babylonian idol, Belteshazzar, keeper of Bel's treasure. These men were the treasure of Israel, and now Daniel is told that he is the keeper of a foreign god's treasure. And the others also get new names relating to pagan idols. Every time someone calls their name, they're reminded, they're in Babylon now. The nation is defeated, the temple is defiled, and the future leaders are removed. Where is God? Has he abandoned his people? Has he abandoned his promises? By all outward appearances, hope seems lost. We can relate to this, can't we? In our world, hopeless situations seem to surround us. The news and the media tell us of devastations happening all across the globe. We hear and we feel overwhelmed and we feel insignificant. Is there no solution? No hope? And there are situations that don't make the headlines, but that are just as real. The challenges and struggles we face each day at university. In New Zealand, it feels like a constant battle. But often we're not even fighting against overt opposition, but against apathy. How can we have dialogue with people who are disinterested or have already made up their minds? I hear the stories of how decades ago, the TSCF Evangelical Union at Auckland University used to have a weekly gathering of 400 committed students. I know it's meant to encourage me, but it just feels so distant from our small group of about 25 that meets now. It feels like we pray and nothing happens. We share but no one responds. We try to live holy lives and we're called bigots, and if we do something wrong we're called hypocrites. We all have different challenges at our universities, but we can find ourselves asking the same question. Has God abandoned us? Well, if we look back to verse 2, it is God who delivered Judah into exile. Although the outward circumstances are bleak, God is still in control. The Lord remains sovereign despite the situation. He kept his promise and will keep his promise. We must not make conclusions based solely on outward appearances. Rather than look at what may seem hopeless, we look at who God is and what he has promised. And Daniel confronts us. He resolves that although he lives in the Babylonian culture, he will not be defiled. And God, who is loving, shows favor to Daniel. Despite being in exile after coming from siege and famine, after having his comfort stripped and being marched through the desert, when he is offered the rich food and wine from the king's table, he has the boldness to decline. We can't be exactly sure what the reason was, but Daniel knew that there was something about eating from the king's table that he could not participate in and still faithfully serve God. Rather than choosing the ease and comfort of blending into the culture, Daniel chooses to remain committed to the sovereign God. Like Daniel, we can't forget that God still reigns. He hasn't forgotten his promise. He hasn't forgotten Daniel, and he does not forget us. Daniel acts, knowing God's character. He asks Ashpenaz for permission to not defile himself. But Ashpenaz is afraid and doesn't want to defy the orders given by Nebuchadnezzar, the totalitarian ruler, the dictator of Babylon. We can see the reason for his concern. Elsewhere in Daniel, the king does not hesitate to kill those who go against his way. Nebuchadnezzar's orders were absolute. Anything else meant death. But Daniel and his friends had confidence in a greater king. Daniel asked the steward, "Test us and compare us. Test our way of living, committed to the true king, with the way of Babylon, committed to Nebuchadnezzar." This surprisingly ordinary decision of choosing vegetables and water over meat and wine produces an extraordinary outcome. Their homes have been taken, God's temple has been desecrated, and their identity has been stolen. But not only does this group appear stronger and better nourished than the others, they are undefiled before God. This is the triumph here. Daniel and his friends choose to live counterculturally through the small decisions of everyday life. Though they live in Babylon, they honor the true king above the king of the nation. They honor God before the values and ethics of the culture. Though we face challenges in our universities, we know we can expect God to remain true to his character. We know that God works through the small decisions we make in order to remain faithful to him. It requires patience, but we can wait expectantly because he is the king above all other powers and influences of this world, and he remains faithful to his people. We see God continue to show this faithfulness by giving understanding to the group of friends. As they study, God gives them knowledge and understanding in all kinds of literature and learning. We see here an engagement with the culture. To be undefiled is not staying away from the Babylonian learning, but in fact, over the 3 years, they commit themselves to excellence in their studies. They would have learned about the language and laws of the country, the art and the music, the history, philosophy and religion, the mathematics, astronomy and war strategy, you name it. They understand the psalmist who said the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The friends recognize the call to learn about God's creation in a way that honors him. And when compared at the end of their education, the Jewish exiles are superior to all the rest in the Babylonian kingdom. Daniel 1 sounds a lot like our university experience. This group may have been the first university Christian fellowship. This story could be one from IFES. 4 young men are studying for 3 years in a foreign environment, hostile to their beliefs. They realize that the way of faith required for their study conflicts with their faith. So despite a terrifying head of department, they try to convince the lecturers and course administrators to allow them to carry out their studies in a way different to university protocol. Against all circumstances, they get this permission and the result stuns us. This group is found to be excellent, and the whole university gets to see a glimpse of God's glory because of their decision. They are together, in service, in exile in Babylon. Now, I haven't heard this exact story, but in New Zealand, we hear these kinds of stories happening all throughout IFES, and it comes as a huge encouragement to us. You might know Zach, a Kiwi student who is doing a doctorate in evolutionary biology. In his second year of undergraduate study, he was inspired by a university debate where 3 ordinary Christian students clearly presented the advantages of a Christian view of ethics over a naturalistic view. He decided that he could do something like that, and has gone on to lead similar events and has been awarded scholarships from the Rationalist and Humanist Society of New Zealand to fund his research. Even now, he is in Europe, speaking at various conferences about evolution, genetics, and philosophy. Zach is a very ordinary guy who is at the heart of an atheistic and secularist environment. But he is committed to developing a Christian mind and applying it in a way that adorns the gospel, and is found to be excellent, honoring God in what he does. Through ordinary people, we see all kinds of unexpected victories like this. These come as a surprise and a comfort, considering the bleak appearances of the start of the chapter and the situations that we can find ourselves in today. And though there is joy in this, this isn't how the chapter ends. We can't conclude there. I'm a jazz musician. Part of my art is to resolve things well. I tried to get the subpoint the last subpoint in my outline, to follow the pattern of the others. I tried to resolve, but I couldn't. Daniel 1 does not resolve. We don't have the happily ever after ending that we see in fairy tale stories. Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. The reign of Cyrus began about 70 years after this time. If the measure of whether there is hope is being in exile or not, then the end is really no different from the start. Daniel is still in exile. But that's not the measure, is it? 70 years later, despite a new king of that empire, there is still the same true king. 2,500 years later, despite new rulers, new dictators, and seemingly hopeless situations, there is still the same true king. Daniel 1 isn't a story about heroes. This isn't a Hollywood movie. Maybe Daniel is a protagonist in the story, but he's no hero. He doesn't rescue Judah from Babylon. At the end, he's still in exile. After this conference, students at university will still be hostile to the gospel, and Christians will still be persecuted and martyred around the world. But we know that God reigns despite the circumstances. God continues to use groups like Daniel and his friends, and groups in IFES to bring glory to himself. It's in the small decisions to remain undefiled before God, rather than choosing the ease and comfort of fitting in. It's through ordinary people who engage with culture in order to demonstrate the wisdom of God. We can go, as these ordinary students and staff, united under the promise of God. Daniel didn't know the ending, but we do. We know that God does fulfill his promise through Jesus. Jesus who dies, but does rise again. So we can have confidence when we are tempted to despair because of hopeless circumstances. We trust in God who is faithful to his people. We can have boldness when trying to live holy lives in places that don't value righteousness, because we know that God shows compassion towards those entrusted to him. We can be excellent in our subjects because we know it is God who gives understanding and insight. And in all of this, God's glory will be displayed throughout the earth, so we can go together in Christ, in mission, into the university. Amen.
So some really important thoughts there around distinctiveness, around boldness, and around what a group of friends can do to make a difference in the environment that they are put in. One of the reasons that I chose to start looking back to the things we spoke about last year is to try and help you understand how parts of the Bible connect with each other. So you think about what Ben was saying from Daniel 1 and what Jeremiah is saying in his letter to the exiles, and Daniel is one of those who is reading that letter to the exiles in Babylon, and what the psalmist is writing in Psalm 139, that we need to start to work out how the Bible connects, what the kind of story of the Bible is. Because I believe that that is absolutely essential in terms of our living undivided lives. Having a better sense of how the Bible joins up will help us better live the undivided lives that God is calling us to do. So we'd like to just briefly turn to the person next to you and tell them one thing that struck you from what Ben was saying and how that challenges you in living an undivided life.